Hello, welcome, and thanks for joining us. I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, and I want to welcome you to the show where we share some wit and wisdom and some wonderful experts to help women navigate through life's challenges and changes, and most importantly, to let you know that you're not alone. Each week through our conversations, we share resources that encourage women to be more confident, resilient, and brave in their choices. So we stream live weekly, Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time on the E360 TV network, which you can find on your favorite streaming services like Roku and Apple TV and Amazon Fire. And we go live simultaneously on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, where you can interact with us. So if you prefer to be on the run and listen to your podcasts, we're also on all of those channels. So if something inspires you today and you want more, please subscribe to your favorite channel. Leave us a comment, share your favorite episodes, and let's make more ripples in the world for women. So, question for you. Have you ever been at a loss for words in tough conversations? Maybe you've walked away from one wishing you said it differently, or maybe you wish you got more of what you want out of the conversation. Well, join the club. You're not alone in that. And if that's the case, this is the episode for you, because Kat Jovey joins me today so we can dive deeply into the art of navigating difficult conversations. Kat is a seasoned coach and expert in fostering authentic communication and building meaningful relationships. Her approach combines empathy, assertiveness, and strategic communication techniques to empower women, professionals, to express their needs clearly and confidently. So many of my clients wish they could do this better. I wish I could do it better sometimes too. So I'm really eager to start this conversation with Kat, and I know it won't be a difficult one. Welcome, Kat. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such a beautiful introduction. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
I am happy that you're here today because we all get into these situations where tough conversations happen and they very often turn tough in the middle of them, and we're not always sure what to do about that. So let's first talk about what might constitute a difficult conversation.
Sure. I mean, difficult conversations, I think they come in all different flavors and from all different places in our lives as well. They can be ones that happen in our personal relationships with loved ones, family members, maybe our partner, our children, our friends, but they can also happen in professional settings. So whether that be with your boss, colleagues, and anyone else in between. And even labeling it a difficult conversation in some ways to me makes me think, it's just a conversation. And I think if we approach conversations with wanting to understand each other, that we can get to so much more depth with each other and so much more understanding with that person.
So true, right? So let's talk about that. How can we approach conversations of any kind, honestly, whether we label them difficult or not, with empathy and understanding? How do we do that?
Yeah, I think really approaching it with, you're coming to this conversation not to, be heard or like not necessarily to, prove a point. You're coming there to try to understand that person, their perspectives, their experiences, how this might be affecting them. And if you come to conversations with that want just to understand and get on the same page as someone else, then that automatically, I think, sort of brings in that empathy because you're coming to understand, not just to talk at another human.
Yeah, okay. So often we go into discussions or meetings wanting or needing something, right? we have an agenda. And often the people in that meeting or in that conversation with us also has an agenda. And maybe those agenda are conflicting. So how do we strike a balance in our conversations between kind of asserting what we want and being flexible to negotiate and maybe find common ground? What do you
Good
think?
question. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you coming into a conversation, I think it's important to, prepare and plan to know what, your ideal outcome is, or to go into it looking, what you might want to get out of it, especially when it comes to negotiating, especially for something like salary or something to do with your job. But in any conversation, to understand what you're hoping to get out of it, but then to sort of meet that person and try to also understand from their perspective what they're looking to get out of it and sort of their reasoning behind it. And it's important to be willing to be flexible or to be creative, or a term that I learned over the last few years is that nonlinear thinking. So instead of seeing something as very black and white, well, it's either I get my way or not, if we're able to be in a bit more of a gray zone and be a bit more open to, finding out what the real want or what the real why is for each person, sometimes you can get really creative and come up with a solution that maybe neither of you had originally thought of. But now that you're able to get both of your ideas and perspectives together, you're able to come up with something even better than, what you might have thought of on your own. So being open to having it be a conversation and not just you stating what you want at the end can open it up for so many more possibilities.
That's so true. I love that. Yeah, being open, being willing to listen and hear what others are saying, asking, and being flexible to, I love the way you said it. It's to be creative, right? So that openness allows for the creativity on both sides. And now you can brainstorm maybe a solution that is a win-win for everybody.
Exactly, because there's no way that you can, truly know exactly what they're going through or exactly what they want. And unless
Yeah.
you're willing to communicate, get curious, and get creative, then, it'll be difficult to find that common ground, I think.
Yeah, get curious. I love that too. Yes. So uh, I, I'm thinking about some conversations that I have had in the past
Mhm.
where that openness was not it was not the atmosphere we created
Right.
for that conversation. So maybe setting some ground rules. I think
Definitely.
about negotiations, especially setting some ground rules might be helpful in that kind of a conversation.
Exactly. With any of, those conversations, and, sort of not blindsiding someone as well, sort of choosing the right place and right time to have that conversation, especially if it's with a loved one. I think, sometimes things can bubble up at times that it may not be the most conducive to having a good open conversation.
Yep.
And so, letting someone know, and I've even done this, with bosses or with colleagues or with
Yeah.
anyone like that, let them know in advance, like, hey, there's something really important I'd like to talk to you about. Mention maybe something about what it's about so they can, prepare themselves for it. But even approaching it that way and the way you frame that, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you. It seems that X is a little bit difficult for us. I'd really love to get together, collaborate, and see how we can create something that works really well for both of us or for the team or in our relationship, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. And that gives people the space to prepare.
Yeah.
And I think the blindsided conversation is often one that becomes contentious
Yeah.
because there was no time to prepare.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
have to prepare ourselves for difficult conversations. or when we can prepare ourselves for difficult conversations, we can approach them differently, right?
Exactly. I think the outcome often can be very different then because you're
Yeah.
approaching it with, again, that openness to connect and to figure out a solution that works for everyone instead of, suddenly maybe feeling attacked in some way. You know that you're coming together to try to figure something out or to try to understand each other better.
And I think that's where, setting kind of ground rules is an important thing to do. Setting up front the intention
Yes.
for this conversation so that it it is a win-win for everybody, or it is an opportunity for each of the contributors to the conversation to be heard without judgment. And that those are, when we set those kind of ground rules, we create the atmosphere where that can happen better.
Yeah, and you're not coming in assuming because I think we make that mistake so often in relationships and conversations. We assume, well, of course they know that I'm not, meaning this in a mean way or whatever it is, but setting
Right.
that intention of I just want to understand. Funny enough, yesterday I had a conversation with a family member and I knew it was going to be a difficult conversation leading up to it. I prepared for it. I prepared them for it. And then when I arrived, I started out by saying, "Hey, my relationship with you is very important to me. I understand that you're upset with me right now, but I don't understand the details. And so I imagine there's something I've said or done that has upset you. And I really want to understand more. Would you be willing to tell me a little bit about it so we can have a conversation about it and try to get on the same page?"
I love the way you did that, because when I heard you say that, I it put me at ease. It let me know that what I feel matters to you. And whatever happened, you want to know how it affected me. You created that atmosphere.
Exactly. You want to have that accepting atmosphere, that not, like you said, like that non judgment, that judgment free zone, so that we can really dig into what's happening. Because maybe I wouldn't feel the same way if whatever happened to me, but
Right.
who cares? It's affected you. You are important to me. I want to understand it. And I want us to figure out a common ground so that we can, continue to have the relationship that we have.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So, are there specific communication techniques that you would recommend for discussing sensitive topics with someone else? Whether
Mhm.
it's a colleague or a loved one, I suspect the techniques can be applied in similar ways, right?
Yeah, yeah,
What might
definitely.
those be?
Yeah. Again, as we talked about, prepare a plan, choose sort of the right time and place as well. Place is so important, making sure to do, if it's a sensitive subject, somewhere very private. You don't want to do this in an open place at the office or at a restaurant if it's your partner. It needs to be somewhere private where you two can speak about these things without worrying about being overheard or worrying about those other feelings that could come from that, of feeling embarrassed or shame or whatever it might be, to make sure it's a safe space just between us and to make sure that when you're in that conversation to use I statements. Many of you may have heard this before, but it just works so well. I feel, or, I have felt X when this has happened, making sure that you're saying, this is how it's made me feel. You're not pointing fingers at the other person. You're just explaining how what has transpired has made you feel. And I think also important to again turn it over to them and try to understand why their actions are happening, and then to
Right.
actively listen, to really seek to understand first, not just listen to respond, listen to understand.
Yeah, those I statements are so important. I can think of many conversations where someone said to me, "You made me feel," and that put me ill at ease.
Mm,
And instead of saying, I felt in this situation, when this happened, I felt, instead of, like you said, pointing fingers.
Yeah, because it's not, because I think when you do that, like you say, it makes you feel ill at ease. It makes you put a little bit of a wall up. Like you immediately
Yeah,
feel a little bit attacked, and some kind of armor
right,
in some way is going to
right.
come up then.
And those walls have a tendency to kind of build upon themselves, right? So here's the first brick, and then something else is said, and here's another one,
Yeah.
and then something else is said, and here we go,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And now we have shut ourselves off.
Hmm. And I mean, you can focus on like using those sorts of statements. I mean, you're focusing a bit more on the issue instead of the person. And that can just be like, because it's a separate problem. And again, that avoids that
Right.
attacking and someone putting up their defense mechanisms then.
Right. I talk about reframing all the time with my clients. It is a beautiful technique. I'd love to hear how reframing can come into play in this situation where we're talking about conversations, difficult discussions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so yesterday, leading up to the conversation that I ended up having, I knew it was going to be a difficult one. However, I framed it in my mind as I'm going to reach out to this loved one and we're going to try to find some common ground. Now, the pragmatic side of me, was saying this may be more than one conversation, so prepare your soul for it. But I approached it as I want to understand because in this case, there was a lot of he said, she said's happening, and I just wanted to get the truth from the person and again seek to understand, just to create a safe space so that we could connect and I could really dig into what's going on. And when you frame a conversation as we are just trying to connect more, I am just trying to understand this person more. When you reframe it in that way, instead of it being, oh, this is going to be a terrible fight, or like, oh my gosh, this is going to be horrible. Even though I was a little bit worried about that, still, I kept grounding myself in this is important for our relationship. She is very important to me. And so I just want to approach this to try to understand where she's coming from. And that made all the difference.
I love how you just said that. When we reframe it in our own minds, we're not reframing it for anyone else. We're reframing it for ourselves. And when you come back to the reframe, which is a positive reframe, we should say that too, right?
Yeah.
We
Yep.
need to reframe it in a positive way for ourselves. When we keep coming back to the reframe, then we can better ensure that the conversation happens the way we intend it to happen.
Exactly. Exactly. You're not
Yeah.
showing up to prove a point or to be
Yeah.
right
Standing
or
your ground, or yeah, being what's the word? Being
um
conciliatory,
sure.
maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, not giving in necessarily, because sometimes we have conversations where there's something I need from
Mhm.
this, right?
Mhm.
I think about negotiations.
Yeah.
There's something I need from this. Let's talk about that for a second. Um, if there's something that I need from this conversation, how might we approach that so that we do get what we need, but we get it not by bullying or stomping our feet, arguing. It's not constructive to do it that way, right? So
Right.
let's talk about how do we do that constructively?
Sure, sure. So, and this side I think really draws more on that sort of logical side of your brain. Yes, you still want to approach it again in all the ways we've spoken about because this is another human that you're looking to communicate and connect with. But I always like to show up to negotiations really having the logical side of it. So let's say I'm negotiating, the easiest one, I'm negotiating my salary. I have in my mind what I would like, but I also have a band in mind, something that I'm, willing to be flexible on. I also have already thought about, again, some nonlinear options. Well, let's say it's not the salary. There are other things that are possible to negotiate with, whether that be vacation days or, working remotely part of the time or whatever is important for you. And sort of understanding that, I think, is important in that case. But when I am doing something like that and wanting to, let's say, get a higher salary, what I approach that with is coming in and showing all the value that I can bring first, those logical things. Given my experience in X, Y, and Z, I can add a lot of value to yada, yada, yada at this company. And on account of this experience, I believe what would be fair. And I think, using the word fair, I think Chris Voss talks about this a lot in negotiation, is a great word to use because most people don't want to be seeming like they are unfair. And so it's a great word to use in there. But I often end those discussions by saying, but I'm very happy to, get creative with you. I'm exceptionally interested in working here and, am happy to work with you to come to something that makes the most sense or that is fair on both sides.
Yeah, that is a good word, fair. Not everyone has the same definition of fair. Coming into conversations like that. So again, setting ground rules.
Yep.
That could be part of the setting of ground rules, that we want the outcome to be fair on all sides, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's a great way to put it. So how do we position ourselves to accept feedback and give it constructively, so that again we're not kind of elevating the emotional component of the discussion.
Sure. And feedback is so important. I mean, I think when you're getting feedback, to approach it with a growth mindset. I mean, we are all humans, we are all works in progress, and there is always room for improvement in so many areas. There may be certain areas are your genius zone, but there are always other areas that are a work in progress that you will need to work on. And being open to that is so important for your personal and professional growth. And I personally, I love getting feedback. I will specifically go out to people either before a presentation or after and say, hey, like, I would really love candid feedback. I'm always looking to improve. So I personally approach people with that mentality of, I'm hungry for feedback. I always want to improve. And you, with your different experiences and perspectives, will be able to give me something that I can't, even if I watch a recording of myself. And I think if you're the person giving the feedback, then you want to make sure, sort of three things that I like to keep in mind when I'm going to give feedback. And this is with an email or in person or anything like that. Although I do believe feedback is best given in person because you can hear tone and all those nonverbal cues on your face as well. But I ask myself three questions before giving feedback. Is it kind? Is it necessary? And is it helpful? And if it doesn't fulfill those three things, I really think a little bit more about if I should be giving that feedback, because you want to make sure that this is going to be helpful for them and it's not coming from a place of being mean or petty or, some other sort of self-serving potentially thing. You want to make sure that this is something that will actually help them on their path to level up in some way, and that it comes from a place of wanting them to do well, a place of kindness. And even though you are being candid, to be there to help them grow in some way.
And vice versa, right? Yeah. So is it kind? Is it necessary? And is it helpful?
Exactly.
Love
I
those
can't tell you.
questions.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many emails I've started writing, and then I thought about those, and then I thought, you know what? This doesn't need to be said.
Yeah. And it just the power of the pause is something
Yeah.
I talk about all the time. But that's a great way to think about it before you hit send, especially on an email or a text,
Oh,
because it doesn't come with our voice.
no.
I have started to record my text messages
Hmm.
for just that reason, because when there is potential for them to be misunderstood,
Mm-hmm.
because they hear my voice and my intention
Mm-hmm.
as I'm speaking, whatever the words are. Um, and that, when I think about how these words could be read in a text, I had this conversation with my husband just yesterday that he got a text from a dear, dear friend of his, and he took it in a way that I don't believe his friend intended. And, I just said, you should talk to him, right? You should
Mm-hmm.
clear the air here, because you guys are just two good friends for something that was said via email or text to be misconstrued, and
Yeah.
then to drive a wedge that might be completely unnecessary.
Exactly. Well, because you don't know what filter those text words will go through, whatever they're feeling in that moment. Maybe they're having a terrible day. Maybe they just got terrible news. You don't know what mindset they're in. And when they read
Right.
that, it's going to filter through those emotions
Yep.
and they're going to read it differently than maybe you intended.
Right. Right. So those three, the power of the pause, just take a second. Think about whether what you have said is kind, is it necessary, and is it helpful?
Yeah,
Love that.
exactly.
Great, great advice. All right. So, how does considering the listener impact how we structure our message or the conversation we want to have?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the listener, it's so important to think about the listener in a variety of ways. So, we're all different learners. We might be an auditory learner, a visual learner, a kinesthetic. So even, how you communicate. Some of my friends, I know if I use my hands more when I'm talking and I might feel a little Italian while doing it, they will just learn better by me doing that. And the words that you choose to use as well. I like to make sure that I've listened to who I'm speaking to and adopt some of the language that they use the words that they use in order to build that rapport quicker. And then, especially if you can, visually see them, whether it be in person or on a Zoom call, to also look at their body language and consider how the words that you're saying are affecting them. How are they reacting to what you're doing? I read a book recently called Cues by Vanessa Van Edward, fantastic book on nonverbal communication. And it was wonderful to dig into those details to assess if you've said something and someone is unhappy with it, their mouth might do a bit of a downturn if they're unhappy about it, or they might cross their arms if they feel uncomfortable with something you've said. There are a whole lot of cues that in some ways there can be other explanations for them, but things to be aware of. And when you are looking at your listener in this way, I think that you're being more active in the conversation when they're speaking to really truly listen and actively listen while you're there. But it just allows you to communicate a lot more effectively when you keep bringing it back to them. If you're sort of being other centered about the conversation instead of me centered, instead of thinking, how is this going to affect me? What do I think? What do I want? If you think, how can I add value to this other person's day? How can I improve their day in some way? It really changes how that conversation progresses.
Yeah, that's so true. Being other centered rather than me centered. That's a great way to put it. And the the nonverbal cues that you were talking about, it brought me back to a conversation I had yesterday with a client. And she was in her car and with very little she did not want the video on for some reason. I don't remember whether it consumed her battery. I'm not sure what.
Sure.
So for the first time, all I could do was listen to her, and that's all she could do for me. And it felt like I had my hands tied behind my back. And I was being much more cautious about the words I used to talk with her about a particular situation that she was struggling with, because I couldn't see her. I couldn't see how she was responding to what I was suggesting, and that felt like my hands were tied.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
I know. Well, and we, now with Zoom being so normal for us,
Yeah.
I think we forget how much information we can get from that. How I can watch your expression and see an eyebrow raise if you're interested in something, or see you smile a little bit when you like something I'm saying. Like, these change in real time what we are deciding to say, and they can also allow us to notice, oh, I said something that wasn't, maybe they're misunderstanding, so I might add something in and say, was that clear? Or in your case, you're listening so closely. I originally started in sales, and it was all on the phone. And I mean, it was an amazing education of really trying to listen, to see if you could hear an intake of breath, or if you could hear those little details. But nothing paints a better picture than being able to actually see that person to get a better understanding.
Yes, because you're making use of all of the cues that they're delivering in their response to what you're saying.
Exactly.
So yeah.
And you're even able to, think about what you're doing. I mean, I'm now, after reading this book, I'm painfully aware of how much I touch my hair and how I preen and, might fix my shirt, or all those little things.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating.
And it makes me think, so what message am I sending, right? When if I sit back, just relax and sit back in my chair and maybe cross my arms, I wonder, what message is being conveyed, received by that.
Exactly. Well, and because it could be a number of things, right? I mean, you might be doing that because, you disagree with something I'm saying, or you might be doing it because you're cold and you want a little comfort. So you're just
Yeah,
holding
or
yourself a little
my
bit.
back's tired and now I need to set back into the back of the chair. That happens to me all the time. And that's why I do that. But I do think about those visual cues and how they are interpreted on the other side, so that, because I believe we are all, communicators at heart, and we all want to be heard and understood. And everyone is like that. So everyone we talk to, that's their desire as well, to be heard and understood, to be included in conversation, to have their thoughts and feelings considered.
I completely agree. I mean, that idea of being heard and understood, I mean, it's such a basic human desire. And I think that, I imagine that was in us many, many moons ago when we lived outdoors and, all huddled near a campfire to stay warm. You had to connect with other people to be part of that
Right.
group, so that you would
Right.
have, be more likely to be able to survive. And I'm sure a piece of that is still in our brain, even though now, times are different, but there's
We have
still,
Zoom.
yeah, we have Zoom. But
Yeah.
there's that want to be heard and understood. And to me, through conversations, difficult or not, that's when that magic can happen. That's when those beautiful moments can happen, where you connect with someone else and you really feel understood about something. And it gives me goosebumps to talk about it, because I mean, that's why I love deep and meaningful conversation. That is my love language. I just want to connect with you, understand you better, understand what you love, what you don't, because that's where the most beautiful things happen in life.
Right. And it is the foundation for meaningful relationships that go far beyond this conversation,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because what we learn from the conversation is what begins to formulate our our thoughts and our feelings about the relationship.
Exactly. And only through having those conversations can you really get a better understanding about how you feel about that person. I mean,
Right.
to tie it to popular culture, I don't know if you've seen this show, Love is Blind.
No.
So it's a show where the contestants on it's a dating show. They go into these separate pods and they can't see each other. And they go on dates with these people and they can only have conversations.
Wow.
And part of me, it makes me so sad because people say things like, I've never talked with anyone like this before. And I think, oh my God, haven't you been dating? But the other part of me is like, this is so beautiful. These people are finally getting to have like the time and space to have those meaningful conversations, and they're getting to connect on a different level that they haven't before. And I hope that then people watching it, seeing this, are thinking about that as well to help their own
Right, right.
relationships.
So they're not influenced by what they see. They
Exactly.
are influenced by what is said
Hmm.
and how they hear it, right?
Yeah.
That's I'll have to look up that show. That sounds like it would be an interesting study
Yes, exactly.
in
I mean, that's
human
that's what
behavior.
reality TV always is for me. It's fascinating to hear
Yeah, it's
humans are
fascinating.
fascinating to hear
Right. Yeah.
how
Yeah.
they grow and evolve, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I think what we've been talking about here is a lot is about active listening.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about what does that mean exactly? What does active listening mean and why is it so crucial?
Mm, yes, active listening is so crucial. And for years, I didn't realize that I was doing it. It's just what I naturally do because I've watched my mother, who is the epitome of active listening for years, doing what she does, and thankfully have taken on those characteristics. But to me, active listening is showing up and being present with that person. So, turning your phone off, or your notifications off, putting it away, being there to connect with that person and being there in that moment. Trying to not think about what you have to do later today or how some other conversation maybe went earlier. Being here in this moment, connecting with this person. And some things that I like to do to really connect are things that we've spoken about, thinking about what language are they using, what is their body language saying, because I find this really ties me into being fully invested into what they're saying. And be there again to understand, not to respond. Dig deeper with questions. This is something I think a lot of us, and I know I used to be guilty of this when I was younger. Someone would tell a story or say something, and I felt the best way to connect with them was to tell them a story when that happened to me too. And I'm not saying don't tell those stories, but what I have found to be more effective at connecting with people is to ask more questions into it. And if you're someone who gets really nervous about, oh God, I don't know what question to ask and what will I say? My favorite one that I go to all the time if I'm not sure where to go from here or what would be the appropriate question is more of a statement. And it's just, tell me more.
Mm,
That opens up to such it allows them to get into more depth, because often we have these sort of surfacey conversations where you ask a question, I answer it, you ask a question, I answer it. Whereas if we're allowed to go deeper, we're allowed to potentially understand each other better and connect in a new way.
yeah, in fact, it's an invitation to do so, isn't it?
I
When
like
when you
that.
say that, right? This is so interesting. Tell me more.
Oh, and who doesn't want to feel like they're interesting? Like, oh, you're interested in
Exactly.
me. You want to hear more? Okay.
Right. And it just opens. So, I talk about this all the time. It's like creating that atmosphere, right? Where
Mhm.
it's open, it's inviting. I feel heard. They are interested enough to say, tell me more. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So active listening. certainly is all those things you described. And how lucky are you to have a mom that role modeled that for you,
Oh, she's
right?
just the loveliest. I'm so fortunate in so many ways.
Yes. I had this vision in my head of you and your mom, and you came to your mom and said, Mom, and she literally dropped everything, turned to you and said, What, hun?
It's so true.
I just had that image.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, it's rare, I think, as adult, not rare, but it's more rare than I thought. Again, I was very fortunate growing up
yeah.
that adults have that, to have someone who actually wants to listen.
Well, there are so many distractions today, right?
Mhm,
We carry our mobile devices in our hands almost everywhere we go.
mhm,
Turning them off, putting them in our pocket or, face down on the table or in our handbag
mhm,
away from us is like the first sign for me that someone is here to hear me
mhm, mhm.
or is open to hearing me, is open to having a conversation that is not, I think about, networking situations, right? Where there's so much going on, so many different people vying for your attention. And there's a lot of, the fear of missing out. I'm here in this conversation, but what am I missing out over here?
Yeah.
You know, and you're literally looking around, right? To see what
Mhm.
you're missing out on while you're talking to somebody. So
And
the art of active listening is truly that. And it's
right.
one that if to be practiced
Yes,
and
my
to
my
be mastered.
exactly. I had a coach and she framed it as, imagine that the person you're networking with or you're talking to in this moment, that they are the last person on earth. So you better make this a great conversation that you're going to enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like putting blinders on
Mhm.
so that you're not paying attention to anything or anyone else while you're having a conversation. And when in networking situations, conversations can be short,
Sure.
but they can still be meaningful and they can still leave someone feeling like that was a good conversation. That was a meaningful interaction.
Exactly. Well, because people remember how you made them feel, not necessarily
Exactly.
what was
Yeah,
discussed. I know
that's
you know
right.
this well. And
Yeah.
so when you make them feel understood or listened to, that can
Or
go so much further.
interesting or important, any of those things.
Mhm, and with that
Yeah,
too, like reframing networking conversations, because I know for many people, it's just a fate worse than death to go and network and talk to strangers. But framing it that way too, like framing it as, I'm going to go introduce myself to this person. They're probably feeling uncomfortable. I'm going to try to make them feel comfortable and heard. And if you come into it with that instead of, I'm so anxious, oh my God, I'm going to have to like pitch myself in
right.
some way and woo, you're being very me centered. But if you get out of your head and go other centered, how can I make this a nice experience for them? It takes the pressure off of you and it
Yeah.
allows potential for you to connect with them in a real, meaningful way.
That is such good advice. Such good advice. Again, taking the other-centered approach to how we network. And in my world, lot of my clients are networking to find their next
Yeah,
best career move.
sure.
And sometimes they're doing that online, and sometimes they're starting it online and then moving it to a phone conversation or a Zoom conversation. And taking that reframing, right? Reframing that conversation is not about you. It's not about you. It's about the other person.
Hmm.
So there may be information you want to gather
Yeah.
from the other person, but how do you make them feel important and valued
Hmm.
so that they're willing to freely give it?
Exactly. And that's, I mean, that's how you build relationships. And
Right.
since, when I originally got into coaching and I was networking, well, I felt very much like I was just like showing up and pitching, where instead I
Yeah.
changed it like, and I just changed it to, how can I add value to this person? Whether I were to, like, I don't even think, oh, is this person a client? I just think, how can I add value to this person?
Yeah.
Maybe I can offer them a resource or a book or a piece of advice or a warm ear. Even
Yeah.
just that can be really helpful, and you never know what that can lead to then if you prioritize them over what want you might have.
Kat, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed talking with you about something that is so fundamental. It is a fundamental skill that as humans we need
Mm-hmm.
to feel like a part of something bigger,
Mm-hmm.
and it's what we need to express what we want, and listen and hear what other people need as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we could talk about this for forever. I say that to most of my guests at the
I'm
end of the
sure.
show because it goes so fast, and I want to get deeper.
We were
Tell me
8 minutes
more.
in, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, we're right near the end.
Yeah, we are. So we need to wrap this up, and I want to ask you if you would share the kind of three key takeaways for our audience to, if they got nothing else, what should they take away with them?
Sure, sure. I think show up to understand, as opposed to coming in with your own agenda. So being other centered, I think, is a really important one. Active listening, which involves just being there, being present, being there for that person, and trying to sort of add as much value as you can. And then I think, like you said, taking that pause, taking that moment, and whether it's going through those three things: is it kind? Is it kind? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? Or just even taking a pause. Emotions often come up during conversations that might turn into difficult conversations, but taking that pause, stepping back, and trying to be other centered about it can completely change the course of that conversation and the course of that relationship.
Mm, yeah, changing the course of the conversation and the relationship. That's powerful. That's That's what we're doing every day. And it's a risk we take every day in every conversation we have, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
true. So true.
Kat, thank you so much for sharing your insights here. It's been, I think, very helpful for a lot of the people I'm thinking about who are struggling with difficult conversations right now. And I think will be very helpful for them. So I want to thank you for being here today. And please let us know, what's the one best way people can reach out to you? I know they're going to want to continue this conversation.
Sure, sure. I mean, you can certainly add me on LinkedIn, Kat Jovey, or on Instagram, knowledge.chasers. I like to put tips out there, and you'd be very welcome to reach out, and we can continue conversations there.
And on your website as well, which is sitting at the bottom
Exactly.
of this link. The Kat, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I've loved having this conversation with you.
The feeling is very mutual. Thank you so much. I loved hearing about your experiences as well. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for those who are watching and listening. I really appreciate that you're a part of this community. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a comment, click a star, and share it. Creating and sharing resources for women is one of my favorite things to do. And another favorite thing is being a career and life coach for women navigating challenging times and helping them get unstuck, explore new possibilities, and find harmony in their careers and lives. So if something in this episode resonates with you and you would like a fresh perspective, reach out. Let's talk. The links to connect with us are in the show notes below. And then let's meet again here next Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific time for another inspiring conversation. Because you know what? I believe it's our time to thrive. So let's thrive together. Till next time, I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, helping you turn transition into triumph.